So I'm not exactly sure when I started doing this. I assume it had something to do with my transition moving from fan fiction where all of my references were pretty much understood, where there was inference and context, um, into doing original work. Anyone that knows me knows that I have a lot of references stored in my head. Every year they get slightly more obscure as well, unfortunately. Um, just not an age thing, but also just how I perceive information. I couldn't tell you what's happening on TikTok, for instance, unless I see it somewhere else. And I think that probably says as much about the way we consume information as it does about my information that I've consumed. But that is something for another time. Also, I have mad allergies, so this is the fourth version of this I have tried filming, which is why I'm a little less peppy than I normally am. I had my first, all this is a segue. I had my first it was an unofficial meeting for my thesis because schedules had to be moved around and changed a little bit. So next week I have my first official meeting for my thesis. It's actually quite funny if you think about it. Excuse me, I'll take a drink of water. And so all this is really about what is called the haircut. And by that, I don't mean like Shampoo with Warren Beatty, the weirdly sexual male hairdresser movie, or Sweeney Todd, where haircuts often lead to decapitations and murder. What I'm talking about is how you edit your work, which is not what I thought I'd be talking about today. I thought I was going to talk more about scenery and setting. But of the things that I learned about, a couple of which were very hard hitting from an advisor that I trust dearly, and not just because they've been here longer than I have, but because of where they are in their own career and the things they have learned, several of which have led me to have to do some very deep soul searching about what I really want and what it means to be called a queer playwright. And maybe eventually I'll do a video about it, but right now it's still very tender and I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do with the info. But just know I'm in the background processing something very thoughtful. This is an important piece of it too, though. Make no mistake, this video is quite important. And eventually I will come to a circuitous point, which is something I'm quite good at. I also think I'm quite nervous about thesis, which is why all of a sudden my allergies started acting up mysteriously out of nowhere. Because they really haven't much today. I wrote Cobblestone Kingdom to be very big, bigger than it should be. If you've never written a screenplay, a stage play, something that's going to be performed, you know that the thing to be performed is going to be about a minute per page. Sometimes more, sometimes less. If you're writing something very witty and something fast paced, you might get less than a minute per page. Generally speaking, it's going to be a minute per page. And Cobblestone Kingdom is impossibly long for what it used to be. There is no way in God's green earth a 4-hour musical is going to get a green light. It does have probably too many songs. There is potentially too much dialogue. I know it will need to be cut down. It's ideal for a thesis because the thesis has to be 100 pages of something. So the work covers most of that. There will, of course, be some addendums, some notes, but more or less, I have set myself up for success. Except, and here's where it kind of goes back to fan fiction and references. I don't know when I started exactly doing this. I don't know if it's been in all of my works, if it's recent, if it came from my time in Oregon, if it came from my time in undergrad, but at some point along the way, I started explaining my jokes. Apparently, that is what at least one person has heard in my work. And so in order to lighten the load as it is, to give it the haircut it needs, to make it more effortless, to make it keep going, I need to go in and find the places where I explain things. I'm not sure why I have not caught this before, or even the quality of it in my work. I have to like specifically look for it because I don't see it necessarily. Um, but it's an interesting thing because one of my big things is not dumbing things down for the audience, and apparently I've been doing that potentially for my whole like now I'm serious about this as a career and calling sort of thing. So I have no idea how long I've been doing it for, and I have no idea what the haircut's going to look like. Before I even start doing the big cuts, before I really start doing collaborations and table read, it does need a haircut. I don't think it'll be too severe. Nothing big change, just looking at where the funny is and the rhythm of it. And that's something I need to do because when I do comedy, I tend to make it too rhythmic. I tend to make it a little too Golden Girls. Um, and that doesn't really work as well for what I do as it did for when it was the Golden Girls. Sometimes it really works. Sometimes it really doesn't. So I guess the thing about it is I don't necessarily encourage writing towards the haircut. It always does help to have more than you need so you can cut stuff. I don't know if anyone actually writes expecting to be edited. I can think of at least one author that should, very much so. Um, but that's what I'm thinking about this week in the thesis diary is this unofficial first meeting was really about some very deep things that I need to work on for this thesis. Not because my thesis isn't good already. It's good, but what's going to get me onto the next step of greatness? Because good isn't going to get me a Kennedy Center honor. Good isn't going to get me a $30,000 grant from Creative Capital or a MacArthur Genius Grant one day. Good is certainly not going to get me off Broadway or a Broadway adjacent. It's not going to get me to the West End. So here's where the rubber's going to meet the road this year. Because I'm good at what I do, and some would say great, and I'd be very flattered, and potentially that's even correct. Not in a I'm an egocentric monster sort of way, just knowing what I do comparatively to other things that I've seen, even other adaptations I've seen. So question is, what does a haircut really look like for me? And then the question for you is, what does the haircut look like for you for your work? What do you think is your blind spot in your work? My blind spot, and this is something that I've actually, it was kind of hinted at last year. That's probably something that I should have kind of figured out before it had to be said bluntly, but it's good that it was said bluntly. It's good. It's good for me to just know. I I want to know where that line is between here is the information you need and here is like how we do it visually versus how I say it. How do I trust the audience with it? Maybe there's something very natural that I'm just not very good at. Maybe this is like my writing thing I'm not good at. But I'm curious about what it is it's going to look like to do that. So my thesis diary this week is not about big cuts, it's about little cuts, haircuts, the thing that you do for editing that makes your work much more effortless and wonderful and beautiful.